Eleanor Catherine Zimmerman had always believed in adventure, but as she stared across the vast, unforgiving prairie with nothing but a small valise at her feet, she realized this wasn't the kind of adventure she'd had in mind. The stagecoach that had abandoned her was now nothing more than a dust cloud on the horizon, and the hot Texas sun beat down mercilessly upon her bonnet-shaded face. It was August 1878, and Fort Stockton, Texas, was still a 3-day journey ahead according to the stage driver who had unceremoniously left her behind. Catherine, or Cat, as her friends back in Boston called her, smoothed down her travel-worn blue calico dress and tried to calm her racing heart. 22 years old and entirely alone in the middle of nowhere, she wondered if her decision to answer that teaching position advertisement had been the worst mistake of her life. "Either I wait for the next stage that might never come, or I start walking," she muttered to herself, lifting her chin with determination. And Zimmermans do not simply give up. She had taken precisely 11 steps when she heard the distant thunder of hooves pounding across the prairie. Shielding her eyes against the sun's glare, Catherine spotted a lone rider approaching from the west. Instinctively, she reached for the small Derringer pistol tucked in her reticule, a parting gift from her father, who had warned her about the dangers of the frontier. As the rider drew closer, Catherine could make out a broad-shouldered figure atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. The man slowed his horse to a walk when he spotted her, and Catherine straightened her spine, determined to appear unafraid despite the vulnerable position she found herself in. "Madam," the stranger called out, touching the brim of his worn leather hat. His voice carried across the prairie air, deep and resonant. "Seems to me you might be a fair distance from where you ought to be." The man dismounted with fluid grace that belied his tall frame. Up close, Catherine could see he was perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, a striking gray-blue that seemed to see right through her carefully composed facade. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jawline. "My name is Quentin McAlister," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "Most folks call me Quinn." Catherine hesitated before responding. "Catherine Zimmerman. The stage driver left me here after we had a disagreement about his inappropriate behavior toward female passengers." Quinn's expression darkened momentarily. "Tate Holloway's driving that route now. Man's got a reputation." His eyes scanned the horizon. "You're a good 50 miles from Fort Stockton, Miss Zimmerman. No other stage due through here for 3 days." Catherine's heart sank, though she refused to let her dismay show. "I see. Then I suppose I shall have to walk." A ghost of a smile touched Quinn's lips. "That'd be quite the stroll in this heat." He glanced at her city boots, clearly unsuitable for such a journey. "I'm headed to Fort Stockton myself. I'd be honored to escort you there if you'd allow it." Catherine regarded him carefully. Her father had warned her about trusting strangers in the West, but her options were painfully limited. Death by exposure on the prairie seemed a certainty without help. "How do I know you're trustworthy, Mr. McAlister?" she asked directly. Quinn reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a silver star. "Deputy U.S. Marshal, madam, was tracking a fugitive but lost his trail about 10 miles back, heading to Fort Stockton to regroup." Relief washed over Catherine, though she remained cautious. "I would be grateful for your assistance, Marshal McAlister." "Just Quinn is fine," he said, returning the badge to his pocket. "Let me secure your bag." As he tied her valise to his saddle, Catherine couldn't help but notice the gentle way he handled his horse, murmuring soothing words as the animal shifted restlessly. "This is Thunder," Quinn said, noticing her observation. "Best horse I've ever had." He's strong enough to carry us both to Fort Stockton, though we'll need to make camp tonight before we get there. The reality of spending a night alone on the prairie with this stranger marshal or not brought a flush to Catherine's cheeks. Is there no alternative route? Perhaps a nearer settlement. Quinn shook his head. Nothing but open country for miles. Don't worry, Miss Zimmerman. You have my word as a lawman that you'll be safe with me. There was something in his steady gaze that compelled Catherine to trust him, despite her reservations. With a nod, she accepted his outstretched hand and allowed him to help her mount. His touch was brief but strong, and she found herself settled in front of him on the saddle before she could reconsider. "Hold onto the pommel," he instructed, his voice close to her ear as he reached around her to take the reins. "Thunder has a smooth gait, but it might take some getting used to if you haven't ridden much." Catherine gripped the saddle horn tightly, acutely aware of Quinn's solid presence behind her close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Yet he maintained as much respectful distance as the shared saddle allowed. As they set off across the prairie, Catherine found herself wondering what twist of fate had led her from her proper Boston life to this moment riding across the Texas wilderness with a marshal she had just met. The rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them and the vast open sky above created a strange sense of freedom she had never experienced before. "May I ask what brings a Boston lady to Fort Stockton?" Quinn asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. "Not exactly a common destination for Eastern travelers," Catherine smiled despite herself. "My accent gives me away, does it? That, and your boots aren't exactly made for Texas soil. I've accepted a position as the schoolteacher," she explained. Fort Stockton advertised back east for someone with proper educational credentials. The salary was generous enough to tempt me to leave everything familiar behind. Quinn was quiet for a moment. "Teaching position, huh? Town's been trying to get a schoolhouse proper established for a while now. Children have been learning in the back room of the church when Pastor Williams has time." "And do you have family in Fort Stockton, Marshal?" Catherine asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "No family," he answered, his tone revealing nothing more. "Fort Stockton's just my assigned territory. I keep a small place at the edge of town when I'm not on the trail." As the afternoon wore on, the vast emptiness of the prairie began to work its peculiar magic on Catherine. The endless sea of grass swaying in the breeze, punctuated occasionally by the lonely silhouette of a mesquite tree, had a hypnotic quality. The city girl who had boarded the stage-coach in St. Louis weeks ago would have found this desolation terrifying, but something inside her was changing with each mile they covered. Quinn proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks visible only to his trained eye and naming the sparse vegetation that somehow thrived in this harsh environment. When they paused to rest Thunder by a small creek, Catherine watched as Quinn moved with the easy confidence of a man who understood the land intimately. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked as he refilled their canteens. 5 years, he replied, securing the caps. "Rode with the Texas Rangers before that, and fought in the war before that." He didn't specify which side, and Catherine didn't ask. The war remained a painful subject throughout the country, even 13 years later. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Quinn guided Thunder to a small grove of cottonwood trees near another trickling creek, a relative oasis in the prairie landscape. "We'll make camp here," he announced, dismounting smoothly before reaching up to help Catherine down. Her legs felt wobbly after hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Quinn's hand steadied her shoulders, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them before he quickly stepped back. "I'll see to Thunder and gather some wood," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "There's jerky in my saddlebag if you're hungry." Catherine busied herself arranging a small camp as Quinn had suggested, spreading out the bedroll he'd provided for her use. The domesticity of the task felt strangely comforting after the upheaval of the day. When Quinn returned with an armload of deadwood, he nodded approvingly at her preparations. "You're taking to frontier life quicker than most city folks," he observed, arranging the wood for a fire. "I've always been adaptable," Catherine replied, watching with interest as he skillfully struck a match and coaxed a small flame to life. "Though I admit this is quite different from what I expected when I accepted the teaching position." Quinn's eyes reflected the growing firelight. "Most things out here aren't what folks expect when they first arrive. The West has a way of either breaking people or making them stronger." "And which did it do to you?" Catherine asked softly, his lips curved in a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Jury's still out on that, Miss Zimmerman." As darkness enveloped the prairie, the stars emerged with a brilliance Catherine had never witnessed in Boston. They sat beside the fire sharing a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Quinn explained that they would reach Fort Stockton by midday tomorrow if they got an early start. "The town's growing," he told her, pouring more coffee into her tin cup. "Army posts there bring stability, and the springs provide reliable water, which is worth more than gold out here." "What are the children like?" Catherine asked, her mind turning to her future students. "In my correspondence with the town council, they mentioned about 20 school-age children. Good kids, mostly, ranch and shopkeeper families. Some of the older boys think they're ready to be men, already might give you some trouble at first, but they need education more than they realize." Quinn stared thoughtfully into the fire. "Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you once you have it." There was something in his voice that made Catherine wonder about his own education, but before she could frame a polite question, he stood abruptly. "You should get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. We'll leave at first light." He moved his bedroll to the opposite side of the fire, making it clear he intended to maintain propriety. Catherine settled into her blankets, watching as Quinn checked his pistol before placing it within easy reach. The gesture reminded her of their situation alone in the wilderness with potential dangers she could only imagine. "Marshal," she said quietly, "thank you. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't come along." In the firelight, his expression softened momentarily. "Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman. You're safe now." Despite the hard ground beneath her and the strange night sounds of the prairie, Catherine fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. She dreamed of endless skies and a pair of storm-gray eyes watching over her. When Catherine awoke, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten. Quinn was already up, tending to a small fire where coffee was brewing. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd already visited the creek to wash. "Morning," he said simply, offering her a cup of the strong, black coffee. "Slept well." Catherine accepted the cup gratefully, trying to tame her hair into some semblance of order. "Better than I expected, thank you." They broke camp efficiently, and soon Catherine found herself once again seated in front of Quinn on Thunder, the rhythm of the horse's gait now more familiar to her body. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, she was struck by the beauty of the landscape bathed in golden morning light. "It's magnificent," she breathed, unable to contain her appreciation. "Most folks only see the harshness," Quinn replied, his voice close to her ear. "Nice to ride with someone who sees the beauty too." The morning passed pleasantly as they traversed the rolling prairie. Quinn pointed out a distant herd of pronghorn antelope, and Catherine marveled at their grace as they bounded away. When they crested a rise around midday, Quinn reined Thunder to a halt. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. Fort Stockton. In the distance, Catherine could make out buildings clustered around what appeared to be a military installation. Even from this distance, she could see it was a far cry from Boston's elegant streets, but something about the frontier town called to her adventurous spirit. Your new home, Quinn added, a note of something indefinable in his voice. As they rode closer, the details of Fort Stockton came into sharper focus. The military post stood prominently, with civilian buildings spreading outward from it like ripples in a pond. There were proper streets, a church steeple, and various businesses more established than Catherine had dared hope. People stopped to watch as Quinn rode into town with Catherine. She was acutely aware of the picture they must present, her clothing rumpled from travel, seated intimately before the deputy marshal on his impressive stallion. That's the schoolhouse, Quinn said, nodding toward a simple but sturdy-looking building set back from the main street. And beside it, that small house is the teacher's quarters, I believe. Catherine's heart quickened at the sight of her new workplace and home. Despite the modest size of the buildings, they represented the independence and purpose she had crossed half a continent to find. Quinn guided Thunder toward a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Stockton House Hotel. Town Council arranged for you to stay here until your quarters are fully prepared, he explained, dismounting before helping Catherine down. The proprietress, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Edna Billings, emerged from the hotel with a look of surprise. Marshal McAlister, and this must be our new schoolteacher. We expected you on yesterday's stage, Miss Zimmerman. There was an incident with the stage driver, Catherine explained diplomatically. Marshal McAlister was kind enough to bring me to town safely. Mrs. Billings's shrewd eyes darted between them, clearly calculating the implications of their arrival together. Well, thank the Lord you're here safe and sound. I've got your room ready, best one in the house for our new teacher. As Catherine was about to follow Mrs. Billings inside, she turned back to Quinn. Marshal, I don't know how to thank you properly. Quinn shifted his weight, suddenly appearing uncomfortable with gratitude. Just doing my duty, Miss Zimmerman. I'll bring your valise up. Mrs. Billings showed Catherine to a pleasant corner room on the second floor, chattering all the while about the town's excitement over the arrival of a proper Boston-educated teacher. The children have been running wild as jackrabbits. Parents are at their wits' end trying to keep learning going between the minister's lessons. When Quinn arrived with her valise, he set it down just inside the door, careful not to step too far into the room. Town Council will want to meet you, he said. Mayor Ellison usually takes his dinner at the hotel around 6. I expect he'll introduce himself then. Will you be joining us, Marshal? Catherine asked, surprising herself with how much she wanted him to say yes. Something like regret flickered across his features. Got to report to Sheriff Dawson about that fugitive. Then I've got paperwork waiting. He touched his hat brim. Good day, Miss Zimmerman. After he left, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted as the events of the past 24 hours caught up with her. She had arrived in Fort Stockton, her new home, thanks to the intervention of a man who was now walking away as if their shared journey had been nothing more than a routine duty. Mrs. Billings returned with hot water for washing. The marshal's a good man, she commented casually, setting down the steaming pitcher. Not one for many words, but respected by everyone. Been through more than most, they say. Catherine's curiosity was piqued. What do they say about him? Mrs. Billings arranged fresh towels beside the basin. Lost his family in the war, parents and 2 younger sisters. Then his wife died in childbirth 3 years back along with the baby. Some say that's when he took the marshal's badge, needed something to live for. She shook her head sadly. Keeps to himself mostly now, except when duty calls. The information settled heavily in Catherine's chest. The glimpses of sadness she detected in Quinn's eyes now made painful sense. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "Rest up now, dear. You'll need your strength to face the town council tonight. They're good folks, but they'll have 1,000 questions for you." Left alone, Catherine unpacked her few belongings and washed away the dust of travel. As she pinned her honey-brown hair into a more presentable style, she found herself wondering when she might see Deputy Marshal McAlister again, and why the thought of him leaving Fort Stockton to track his fugitive filled her with such unexpected dread. That evening, dressed in her best remaining gown, a modest navy blue with white trim, Catherine made her way downstairs to the hotel dining room. As Mrs. Billings had predicted, Mayor Ellison introduced himself immediately, a portly, enthusiastic man with impressive side whiskers and an even more impressive voice that carried throughout the room. "Miss Zimmerman, welcome to Fort Stockton," he boomed, grasping her hand. "We've been counting the days until your arrival. Allow me to introduce some of our town council members." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions: the banker, the general store owner, the minister, and several prominent ranchers and their wives. Catherine smiled and conversed politely, all while scanning the room for a tall figure with storm-gray eyes who never appeared. "We've scheduled the school to open Monday next," Mayor Ellison informed her over dessert. "Gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. The teacher's house needs just a few finishing touches. New stove arriving tomorrow, I believe." "That's very generous," Catherine replied. "I'm eager to see the schoolhouse and begin organizing lessons." "Samuel here can show you around tomorrow," the mayor said, clapping the shoulder of a young man Catherine had been introduced to earlier, the minister's son, Samuel Williams, who had been teaching the children informally. Samuel, a pleasant-faced man of perhaps 25 with carefully combed brown hair, smiled eagerly. "It would be my pleasure, Miss Zimmerman. The children have much potential, but I fear my knowledge reaches its limits in many subjects." "I'm sure you've done admirably," Catherine assured him, noting his obvious relief at relinquishing teaching duties. As the evening wore on, Catherine found herself increasingly drawn into conversations about the town's history, challenges, and aspirations. She learned that Fort Stockton Springs had made it an oasis for travelers since before recorded history, that the town had survived Indian raids and the turmoil of the Civil War, and that its citizens harbored dreams of the railroad eventually connecting them to the wider world. She retired to her room that night with her head spinning from information, and her heart strangely divided, excited about the warm welcome and the challenge ahead, yet unable to forget the man who had rescued her from abandonment on the prairie. The next morning, Samuel Williams arrived promptly at 9 to escort Catherine to the schoolhouse. The simple building had a certain charm, with large windows to admit light and a small bell tower atop the pitched roof. "The children are aged from 6 to 15, Samuel explained as he unlocked the door. "Most of the older boys only attend sporadically, especially during busy seasons on the ranches." Inside, Catherine found a surprisingly well-equipped classroom with rows of desks, a teacher's desk on a raised platform, a blackboard, and even a small bookshelf containing basic texts. "This is wonderful," she said, running her fingers along a desk. "I wasn't expecting such fine facilities." Samuel beamed with pride. The whole town contributed. Education means a great deal to folks here. Many of them had little opportunity for schooling themselves and want better for their children. Catherine spent the morning exploring the classroom and the attached teachers' quarters, a snug 2-room dwelling with a small kitchen, bedroom, and sitting area. Though modest, It would be the first place she could truly call her own. After Samuel departed, Catherine lingered in the schoolhouse, planning lessons and imagining the space filled with students. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear the door open until a throat cleared behind her. Startling, she turned to find Quinn standing just inside the entrance, hat in hand. The sight of him sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Marshal McAlister," she said, composing herself. "What a pleasant surprise. Miss Zimmerman," he nodded formally. "Just checking to see that you're settling in all right." "Very well, thank you," she gestured around the classroom. "The schoolhouse is better than I dared hope." Quinn took a few steps forward, glancing around the room. "Folks here worked hard on it. Started building last fall when they decided to hire a proper teacher. Mr. Williams showed me around this morning. He seems relieved to be returning to his theological studies full-time. Samuel's a good man, but teaching isn't his calling." Quinn ran a hand along the back of a desk, his expression thoughtful. "Never had much schooling myself. Father believed in learning through work more than books." Catherine studied him with new interest. "Yet you value education. Seen enough of the world to know what opens doors and what closes them." His eyes met hers. "You'll do these children a great service, Miss Zimmerman." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "I hope to." An awkward silence stretched between them before Quinn spoke again. "I came to let you know I'm riding out tomorrow. Got word the fugitive I'm tracking was spotted near El Paso." "I see." Catherine fought to keep disappointment from her voice. "Will you be gone long?" "Hard to say. Could be weeks." He shifted his weight, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "Just wanted to make sure you were situated before I left." The thoughtfulness of the gesture wasn't lost on Catherine. "That's very kind of you, Marshal." Quinn placed his hat back on his head. "Town's good people. Sheriff Dawson will help if you need anything while I'm gone." As he turned to leave, Catherine found herself stepping forward. "Marshal Quinn." The use of his first name stopped him at the door. "Thank you again, for everything." He looked back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Take care of yourself, Catherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her breath catch. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Catherine stood motionless in the empty schoolhouse, listening to the sound of his boots on the wooden walkway outside, then the receding hoofbeats as he rode away. She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was merely apprehension about facing her new life alone, not the departure of a man she had known for barely a day. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Catherine prepared for school to begin. Her teacher's quarters were completed, and she moved in with her few possessions, gratefully accepting donations of kitchen implements and linens from the townswomen who seemed determined to make her feel welcome. On Monday morning, Catherine stood nervously before her classroom as parents brought their children for the first day of school. The faces that looked up at her ranged from excited to suspicious, particularly among the older boys who clearly wondered what this Eastern woman could possibly teach them that they needed to know. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Miss Zimmerman, and I'm honored to be your teacher." By lunchtime, Catherine had already identified her most promising students and her most challenging ones. 8-year-old Lily Tucker absorbed information like a sponge, while 14-year-old James Cortland made it clear he believed his time would be better spent working his father's ranch. "Miss Zimmerman," James drawled during an arithmetic lesson. "When am I ever going to need to figure the area of a circle?" Catherine approached his desk calmly. "When you need to determine how much fencing for a round corral, or how much water a circular tank can hold, or how much land you can irrigate with your water rights." She smiled at his surprised expression. Mathematics isn't just for classrooms, James. It's for solving real problems. The boy straightened slightly in his seat, and Catherine saw the first flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. By the end of the first week, Catherine had established a rapport with most of her students and a routine that seemed to work well. The town continued to welcome her warmly, with invitations to Sunday dinners and church socials. Samuel Williams was particularly attentive, often walking her home from church or bringing by books he thought might interest her. Yet despite the growing comfort of her new life, Catherine found her thoughts frequently turning to Quinn McAlister. Each time a rider came into town, she caught herself looking to see if it might be him returning from his mission. Each night before sleep claimed her, she remembered the security she had felt in his presence during their brief journey, and the connection she had sensed between them, despite his reserved nature. 3 weeks after school began, Catherine was supervising the children during lunch break when Sheriff Dawson approached the schoolyard. The older man's expression was serious enough that Catherine immediately feared bad news. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, touching his hat. "Got a telegram I think you should see." Her heart racing, she took the yellow paper from his outstretched hand. It was from the Stagecoach Company, formally apologizing for the incident with driver Tate Holloway, who had been terminated from employment. The company offered compensation for her distress and assured her that such behavior would not be tolerated. Marshal McAlister sent a report from El Paso, the sheriff explained. "Made quite a point of what happened to you. Companies worried about their reputation." Catherine refolded the telegram, touched that Quinn had taken the time to address the matter even while pursuing his fugitive. "Thank you, Sheriff. Any word when the marshal might return?" she asked, trying to sound merely curious. Sheriff Dawson's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Sent word yesterday. Should be back end of the week, barring complications." The news lightened Catherine's spirits considerably, though she chided herself for such a strong reaction to the imminent return of a man who probably gave her little thought. Nevertheless, she found herself paying extra attention to her appearance that Friday, selecting her most becoming dress of forest green that complemented her hazel eyes and arranging her hair with particular care. The school day seemed to drag endlessly, and Catherine found herself glancing frequently toward the window. When the final bell rang and she had dismissed the children, she lingered in the classroom, organizing books and cleaning the blackboard with more thoroughness than necessary. It was nearly dusk when she finally locked the schoolhouse and started toward her small house next door. As she rounded the corner, she stopped abruptly. Quinn McAlister stood on her modest porch, hat in hand, looking trail-worn but very much a welcome sight. "Marshal," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice as she approached. "Miss Zimmerman." He nodded, his eyes taking in her appearance with an appreciative glance he couldn't quite conceal. "Hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Not at all. Please come in." Catherine unlocked her door, suddenly self-conscious about her simple quarters. Quinn hesitated only briefly before following her inside. He looked out of place in the tidy feminine space, his tall frame and rugged appearance a stark contrast to the delicate teacups arranged on her small sideboard. "Can I offer you tea? Or coffee?" Catherine asked, removing her shawl. "Coffee would be welcome, thank you." Quinn remained standing, seemingly reluctant to sit on her flowered settee as Catherine busied herself with the stove and coffee pot. She asked, "Was your mission successful?" "Got him," Quinn confirmed. "William Bloody Bill Jenkins wanted for stagecoach robbery and murder in 3 territories. He won't trouble honest folks again." There was no pride in his voice, merely the satisfaction of a necessary job completed. Catherine wondered how many such men he had brought to justice over the years. When the coffee was ready, They sat at her small table, an awkward silence falling between them until both spoke at once. "I received a telegram. How are the children?" They stopped, sharing a brief smile at the overlap. "Please," Quinn gestured for her to continue. "I received a telegram from the stagecoach company," Catherine said. "Sheriff Dawson mentioned you had reported the incident with Mr. Holloway." "That was very thoughtful of you." Quinn's expression hardened slightly. "Men like that have no business working with the public, especially women traveling alone. Company needed to know." "Well, I appreciate it." Catherine sipped her coffee. "And how was your journey otherwise?" "No troubles along the way." Quinn relaxed marginally, recounting some of the less dangerous aspects of his pursuit. Catherine listened attentively, fascinated by glimpses into a world so different from her sheltered Boston upbringing. "And you?" he asked eventually. "How are you finding life in Fort Stockton?" "Better than I expected," she admitted. "The children are eager to learn, most of them, anyway, and the town has been very welcoming. Heard you've made quite an impression. Mrs. Billings says all the children talk about is Miss Zimmerman this and Miss Zimmerman that." Catherine blushed at the compliment. "They're good children. Even James Cortland is beginning to see the value in education, I think." "That's a minor miracle," Quinn commented with a rare smile. "His father's been complaining for years that the boy's more interested in testing boundaries than learning anything useful." Their conversation flowed more easily as twilight deepened outside the windows. Catherine lit lamps as Quinn told her more about Fort Stockton's history and the surrounding territory. For his part, Quinn seemed genuinely interested in her teaching methods and her observations about her students. When the clock on her mantel chimed 9, Quinn set down his cup reluctantly. "I should let you rest. It's been a long day." "It was kind of you to visit," Catherine said as she walked him to the door. "I'm glad you returned safely." At the threshold, Quinn turned to face her. In the soft lamplight, the usual guardedness in his eyes had softened. "I thought about you," he admitted quietly. "Out there. Wondered how you were faring." The simple confession made Catherine's heart skip. "I thought about you too," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, might even step closer, but instead he placed his hat on his head. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Quinn." As she watched him walk away into the darkness, Catherine knew with sudden clarity that her feelings for Quinn McAlister had progressed far beyond gratitude or casual interest. What she didn't know was whether he felt the same, or if his past losses had closed his heart permanently to such possibilities. The following weeks brought a subtle change to Catherine's life in Fort Stockton. Quinn began to appear more regularly in town, often finding reasons to pass by the schoolhouse or to be in the general store when she did her weekly shopping. Their conversations remained largely casual, but Catherine noticed he gradually revealed more about himself, his childhood in Missouri, his time with the Rangers, his hopes of someday having land of his own. For her part, Catherine found ways to include him in her life, inviting him to school presentations, or seeking his assistance with projects for her students. When he mentioned offhandedly that he had never read Ivanhoe, she presented him with her own copy, initiating an ongoing exchange of books and discussions about their contents that gave them reason for regular interaction. The town noticed. Catherine became aware of knowing glances when she and Quinn were seen together, and Mrs. Billings took to making comments about settled men making the best husbands. Samuel Williams's attentions cooled noticeably, and Catherine overheard snippets of speculation about the teacher and the marshal when townspeople thought she couldn't hear. Yet despite their growing closeness, Quinn maintained a certain distance, never calling on her formally, never making declarations, never crossing the invisible line between friendship and courtship. Catherine began to wonder if she had misread his interest entirely. That changed on a crisp November day when Catherine was supervising her students' outdoor game of baseball during lunch break. The crack of a bat, a ball soaring higher than expected, and suddenly, 10-year-old Peter Donovan was running backward, eyes on the sky rather than where he was going. Before Catherine could shout a warning, the boy tumbled into an abandoned well shaft at the edge of the schoolyard, a danger no one had realized was there, its rotted wooden cover collapsing under his weight. The children's screams brought townspeople running as Catherine rushed to the edge of the hole. Peter's terrified cries echoed from about 15 feet below, where he had landed on a ledge rather than falling to the bottom of the well. "Peter." "Don't move, sweetheart," Catherine called down, her heart pounding with fear for her student. "Help is coming." Quinn was among the first to arrive, taking in the situation with one quick glance. Without hesitation, he removed his gun, belt, and jacket. "Need rope," he called to the gathering crowd. "And lanterns." Within moments, several men had brought the requested items. Quinn swiftly fashioned a harness for himself and tested the strength of the rope they would use to lower him. "Marshal, maybe one of us smaller fellows should go down," suggested the blacksmith's apprentice. Quinn shook his head. "Boy might be hurt, need someone who can carry him if necessary." His eyes met Catherine's. "Don't worry, I'll get him." As men positioned themselves to lower Quinn into the well shaft, he paused beside Catherine. "Keep talking to him, keep him calm." Catherine nodded, swallowing her fear as she watched Quinn begin his descent into the darkness. She knelt by the edge, calling encouragement to both Peter and Quinn as the marshal was carefully lowered toward the terrified child. Long minutes passed with the town holding its collective breath. Then Quinn's voice echoed up from below. "Got him." He's scared and scraped up, but nothing broken, sending him up first. The small, dirty, tear-streaked face of Peter Donovan emerged from the well shaft in Quinn's makeshift harness, strong hands pulling him to safety, where his sobbing mother waited. Catherine helped remove the rope, checking the boy for serious injuries, and finding only minor cuts and bruises, as Quinn had said. When Quinn himself was pulled from the well minutes later, covered in dirt and with a bleeding gash on his forearm where he'd scraped it against the stone wall, Catherine felt such overwhelming relief that she acted without thinking. As soon as his feet touched solid ground, she threw her arms around him, heedless of the dirt or the watching townspeople. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you." After a moment of surprise, Quinn's arms encircled her gently. "He's a good kid. Couldn't leave him down there." Becoming aware of their audience and the impropriety of her impulsive embrace, Catherine stepped back, her cheeks flushing. But the look in Quinn's eyes as they separated told her more than words could have. The protective instinct that had sent him into the well without hesitation extended to her as well, and ran deeper than mere duty. That evening, after Peter had been thoroughly examined by the town doctor and declared remarkably unscathed, Catherine was preparing for bed when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Quinn standing there, cleaned up from his earlier ordeal and with a bandage visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "I hope it's not too late to call," he said, his usual confidence seemingly diminished. "Not at all. Please come in." Catherine ushered him inside, noting he seemed unusually tense. They stood in her small sitting room, the silence between them charged with unspoken words until Quinn finally spoke. "I keep telling myself I should stay away from you," he said abruptly. "That I've got no right bringing my complicated life to your doorstep." Catherine's heart began to race. "Is that what you want, to stay away?" "No." The single word held such emotion that Catherine found herself taking a step closer to him. That's the problem. What I want and what's right for you might be two different things. Shouldn't I have some say in what's right for me? Catherine asked gently. Quinn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. You're young, educated, with your whole life ahead of you. I'm a man with a dangerous job, 10 years your senior, with more ghosts than future. Is that how you see yourself? Catherine's voice softened. Because that's not what I see at all. Something vulnerable flickered in Quinn's storm-gray eyes. What do you see? Catherine gathered her courage. I see a man of honor and compassion. Someone who would ride into the wilderness to rescue a stranded woman without a second thought. Someone who would lower himself into a well to save a child. Someone who values learning and justice and doing what's right, even when it's difficult. She took another step toward him. I see a man I've come to care for very deeply. Quinn stood very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Catherine, he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. I lost everyone I ever loved. I'm not sure I could survive losing you too. Who says you have to lose me? She reached out tentatively, her fingertips just brushing his hand. Perhaps it's time to consider what you might gain instead. The touch seemed to break something in Quinn. With a sound that was half surrender, half hope, he pulled her gently into his arms. When his lips found hers, Catherine felt as though every moment since he had found her abandoned on the prairie had been leading to this perfect connection, this sense of coming home. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless when they finally parted. Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing alone on the prairie, looking like you were ready to walk all the way to Fort Stockton by sheer determination, he confessed. Catherine smiled, her hand still resting on his chest where she could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart. I've wanted you to do that since somewhere around the time you built our campfire that first night. Quinn chuckled, the sound warming her from within. Always did have good timing. They moved to sit on Catherine's small settee, hands intertwined, the barriers between them finally broken. Quinn spoke of his fears of loving again, of the pain he had carried since losing his wife and child. Catherine shared her own fears of disappointing her family by leaving Boston, of failing in her mission to bring education to the frontier. My father wanted me to marry a banker or a lawyer, she admitted. Someone suitable who would keep me in the life I was raised to lead. And now, Quinn asked, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her palm. What do you want? Catherine met his gaze steadily. A life that matters. Work that makes a difference, and someone to share it all with, someone brave and true, who sees me for who I really am. Quinn lifted her hand to his lips. I see you, Catherine Zimmerman. I've seen you from the first moment. When he left that night, it was with a proper goodnight kiss at her door and a promise to call on her, officially the following Sunday after church, a public declaration of his intentions that would leave the town in no doubt about their relationship. The winter months brought both challenges and joys to Fort Stockton. Heavy snows isolated the town for weeks at a time, making Quinn's duties as marshal more focused on local matters than pursuing fugitives across the territory. The schoolhouse was often cold despite the pot-bellied stove roaring in the corner, and Catherine found herself teaching children, wearing coats and mittens as they practiced their arithmetic. Yet the season also brought a deepening of her relationship with Quinn. Their courtship progressed with a steadiness that reflected his character, thoughtful gifts of books she mentioned wanting to read, escorting her to town gatherings, Sunday dinners with families who had come to consider them both part of the community. When Christmas arrived, Quinn presented her with a delicate silver locket containing a small photograph of the two of them that Mayor Ellison's wife had arranged to have taken. "So you'll always have me near your heart," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. Catherine's gift to him, a finely crafted leather journal for his thoughts and observations, brought an unexpected sheen of moisture to his eyes. "No one's given me something so personal in a very long time," he admitted. As winter gave way to spring, Catherine found herself falling more deeply in love with both Quinn and the life she was building in Fort Stockton. Her students were progressing well, with even James Cortland now regularly attending and showing aptitude for engineering concepts. The town council had approved funds for expanding the school the following year, citing the success of her teaching methods. Yet shadows occasionally crossed their happiness. Quinn's duties sometimes took him away for days or weeks, leaving Catherine to worry about his safety. News of violent encounters with outlaws or hostile tribes in nearby territories reminded her of the dangers he faced regularly. One evening in late April, as they walked along the banks of Comanche Creek after dinner at the hotel, Quinn stopped beneath a cottonwood tree coming into full leaf. "Catherine," he said, his voice unusually serious, "there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened as he took both her hands in his. After months of courtship, she had begun to wonder if this moment would ever come. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," Quinn continued. "You've brought light back into a world I thought would always be dark for me." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep through the war and everything after." Dropping to one knee before her, Quinn looked up with such love in his eyes that Catherine felt tears forming in her own. "Catherine Zimmerman, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise an easy life, but I swear I'll love you and protect you until my dying day." "Yes," Catherine whispered, then again more strongly. "Yes, Quinn, nothing would make me happier." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to seal their engagement with a kiss, Catherine felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the doubts and fears that had plagued her journey west. This man, this place, this life. This was where she belonged. They agreed to a June wedding, giving them time to prepare while allowing the school term to conclude. The news of their engagement spread through Fort Stockton like wildfire, met with general approval, and only a few disappointed sighs from ladies who had harbored hopes for the handsome Marshal themselves. Catherine wrote to her parents with trepidation, expecting disappointment or even anger at her decision to marry a frontier lawman rather than returning east. Their response, when it finally arrived weeks later, was cautiously supportive, her mother expressing hopes that Catherine knew what she was doing, her father requesting more information about Quinn's prospects and character. "They're concerned for your future," Quinn observed when she shared the letter with him. "That's natural enough. They don't understand what I've found here," Catherine replied, leaning against his shoulder as they sat on her porch swing. "How could they? I didn't understand it myself until I experienced it." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "And what exactly have you found, Miss Soon-to-be McAlister?" Catherine smiled at the name. "Purpose, community, a place where what I do matters every day. And you a love I never expected, but now can't imagine living without." As their wedding day approached, practical matters demanded attention. Quinn had been living in rented rooms above the livery stable quarters, entirely unsuitable for a married couple. With Catherine required to live in the teacher's house as part of her position, they needed to determine where they would make their home. The solution came unexpectedly, when Sheriff Dawson announced his intention to retire at the end of the summer. "Town council wants to offer you the sheriff's position, Quinn," Mayor Ellison informed him during a meeting in late May. "Comes with the house next to the jail. Nothing fancy but solid construction, 3 bedrooms, room to grow if you understand my meaning." The significant look accompanying this last comment made Quinn flush slightly, but his eyes shone with possibility when he relayed the news to Catherine later. "It would mean staying in town more, fewer long pursuits," he explained. "More administrative work, less danger." "And a real home for us," Catherine added, imagining the possibilities of the sturdy house she had passed many times on her walks through town. "If you think a lawman's wife is the future you want," Quinn said, a hint of his old uncertainty creeping into his voice. Catherine took his face between her hands. "A future with you is what I want. The rest is just details." Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect June morning. The entire town seemed to have squeezed into the small church, or gathered outside its windows to witness the union of their marshal and their teacher. Catherine wore a new dress of ivory satin sent by her mother as a peace offering, while Quinn cut a striking figure in a new black suit, his badge polished to a high shine on his chest. As Catherine walked down the aisle on Mayor Ellison's arm, her father being unable to make the journey from Boston, her eyes locked with Quinn's. The love and wonder she saw there made her feel more beautiful than any mirror ever could. Pastor Williams conducted the service with evident pleasure, having watched their relationship blossom from the beginning. When Quinn and Catherine exchanged their vows, his deep "I do" and her clear response seemed to echo in the church like a perfect harmony. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Quinn's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the church erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. McAlister. The celebration that followed at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with seemingly every resident of Fort Stockton determined to wish them well. Catherine danced with Quinn, with Mayor Ellison, with James Cortland, now almost as tall as Quinn himself, and with countless other well-wishers until her feet ached pleasantly in her new shoes. As twilight fell, they slipped away to the sheriff's house, soon to be theirs officially, which the ladies of the town had prepared for their wedding night. Lanterns had been lit, casting a warm glow through the rooms. Wildflowers adorned every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Quinn carried Catherine across the threshold with ease, setting her down gently in what would be their parlor. For a moment, they simply stood looking at each other, the reality of their marriage still new and wondrous. "Welcome home, Mrs. McAlister," Quinn said softly, taking her hands in his. "Home," Catherine repeated, savoring the word. "I never expected to find it so far from where I began." "Do you have regrets?" Quinn asked, a shadow of vulnerability crossing his features. "About leaving your life in Boston behind," Catherine shook her head, stepping closer to him. "How could I regret the journey that led me to you? If that stage driver hadn't behaved so abominably, if you hadn't found me standing alone on the prairie." "I'd have found you somehow," Quinn interrupted, drawing her into his arms. "Maybe not that day, but someday. I believe that now." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, the challenges they would face, the life they would build, the love that would sustain them through it all. As the kiss deepened, and Quinn lifted her into his arms again to carry her to their bedroom, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that being abandoned on the prairie had been the greatest stroke of fortune in her life. In the years that followed, Quinn and Catherine McAlister became pillars of the Fort Stockton community. Quinn served as sheriff with the same dedication he had shown as a marshal, bringing stability and justice to the growing town. Catherine continued teaching, eventually overseeing the expansion of the school into a proper academy that served children from surrounding settlements as well. Their home filled with love and laughter, especially after the birth of their son, William, in the summer of 1880, followed by twin daughters, Eleanor and Margaret, 2 years later. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, reading to his children nightly from the growing library he and Catherine maintained, teaching his son to ride almost before the boy could walk, and showing his daughters that a man could be both strong and gentle. When Catherine's parents finally visited from Boston in 1883, they found not the primitive frontier outpost they had feared, but a thriving town with their daughter at its heart respected, loved, and more fulfilled than they had ever seen her. Her father, initially skeptical of her Western husband, found in Quinn a man of intelligence and principle whose devotion to Catherine was undeniable. "You were right to follow your own path, daughter," he admitted on their last evening together. "I see now what you found here that Boston could never offer you." As Fort Stockton continued to grow, so did the McAlisters' connection to it and to each other. They weathered the usual storms of life, illness, hardship, occasional disagreements with the same resilience that had brought them together in the first place. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Catherine riding out to the spot on the prairie where they had first met. A small homestead now stood near where she had been abandoned, the land transformed by settlement but still recognizably the place where their story began. "Strange to think how close we came to never meeting," Catherine mused as they sat beside a small stream, sharing a picnic lunch. "If that stage had continued on with me aboard." Quinn's hand found hers, the years of working with both gun and pen having left it calloused but still gentle in its touch. "I've come to believe some things are meant to be, no matter what obstacles stand in the way." Catherine leaned against his shoulder, watching their 3 children playing nearby. William, now a sturdy 9-year-old with his father's serious eyes, the 7-year-old twins with Catherine's honey-brown hair and Quinn's determination. "You ever regret settling down?" she asked. "Giving up the freedom of the marshal's badge for a sheriff's desk and a house full of responsibilities?" Quinn laughed, the sound as warm and welcome to her as it had been a decade before. "Not for a single moment. Finding you stranded on this prairie was the luckiest day of my life, Catherine McAlister. Everything good I have came from that moment." As the afternoon sun bathed the prairie in golden light, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here from a proper Boston upbringing to abandonment in the wilderness to this rich, meaningful life with the man beside her. The stage driver who had left her alone on the prairie had meant it as punishment for her refusal of his advances, never imagining he was setting her on the path to true happiness. "We should head back soon," Quinn said eventually, watching the children with a father's protective eye. Storm clouds building in the west. Catherine nodded, but neither of them moved immediately, both savoring the moment and the memories it evoked. "I love you, Quinn McAlister," she said simply, turning to meet his gaze. "Every day more than the day before." His kiss still had the power to make her heart race, even after 10 years of marriage. "And I love you, Catherine, for saving me when I didn't even know I needed saving." They gathered their children and mounted their horses as the first distant rumbles of thunder reached them. As they rode back toward Fort Stockton, Catherine looked over at Quinn, still handsome, still strong, still the man who had found her when she was lost, and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The stagecoach driver had left her alone on the prairie, thinking to break her spirit. Instead, He had delivered her directly into the arms of her destiny.